I will introduce each person at a time. They are going to talk to you a little bit about some of the initiatives, some of the transformations that are occurring at the ministry level and actually in schools as well. And then we are going to hear from some of our faculty who have been working closely with the ministry, and as they advance some very big ideas, globally large ideas, where there's some really good synergies with ministry directions. And then we'll have a chance to talk about what that means to us. I'm very pleased to introduce Rod Allen and Maureen Dockendorf. Now we have some really interesting hierarchical ways of knowing ourselves and naming things and naming people here. But these are the Superintendent of Learning and the Superintendent of Reading. Maureen is a former assistant superintendent from Coquitlam, and I had the pleasure of working with Maureen when I was a teacher in Coquitlam. And Rod Allen is a former superintendent of Bulkley Valley School District. So they come from the field to the work that they do now at a larger level, and we're very pleased to welcome them to speak to us now. Rod Allen and Maureen Dockendorf.
Thanks, and that great introduction, and what a wonderful day to be here, hearing about the year of teacher education. What a spectacular idea! That just almost sent shivers down my spine. If I wasn't old and jaded from the ministry, I'd be excited. I'm not allowed to be excited anymore. They beat that out of you pretty fast. But just want to take a couple of minutes and set the scene a little bit about what's happening in British Columbia. The ministry certainly has a part of that, but as Wendy was saying, it is really part of a collective endeavor that's going on around the province, which to me is why this feels quite a bit different than other times we've sort of tried major things going on, is sort of the crowdsourcing or the co-construction idea. So as apparently we have to have a slide, so this is our slide. Hard to believe Maureen and I would come slide free, but we did. The apple has evolved. Things going on in classrooms are so different around BC and around the world. The context is changing so fast, and yet systems are different. They have a hard time trying to keep up. So the question that was sort of before us is, how do we rethink our system to align with the kinds of practices that are going on in our classrooms around the province? And how do we encourage more of that great stuff, those islands of excellence to spread around the province? And how is it that the ministry can help that? Yes, ministry and help in the same sentence. Again, I know that's kind of a weird concept, but how is it that the ministry can help to facilitate that process, knowing that we don't teach in classrooms anymore? Yes, Maureen and I and some others are quite field-based people and are new to government, and that's why we were brought into government, is because we're not government people. Ruben over there, he's a government guy. Sorry. But to sort of bring that field educator perspective into the conversation. So how is it we can actually help? What is it that we can do as ministry? What are the levers we can pull that can assist this kind of a transformation that's really happening at a grassroots level around the province? And Heather's going to talk a bunch more in a couple of minutes about what that looks like from her perspective as a teacher. And when we started asking that question, we heard from the field curriculum. We heard assessment. We heard a whole bunch of funding structures. We heard graduation. We heard a bunch of things like that about, those are the kinds of barriers that seem to be getting in the way of the transformation, getting in the way of teachers really engaging with students in the way that we know we want to happen. Coverage, for example. I have a bazillion learning outcomes, and my job is to cover learning outcomes, as opposed to, I got into this to teach kids and to help kids learn and grow. So how do we think about those things? So we just started down that list and said, okay, let's think about curriculum differently. How can we think about that? And Maureen's going to talk some more about how we're sort of trying to process out some major curriculum shifts. But part of that is also our deputy minister. Best quote from James Gorman, in my mind, is culture eats policy for breakfast. And that's why I'm excited here. So you can have the best policies, unless the culture shifts to support those policies and enable and enact, and things are looking different in classrooms and in schools, nothing's changed. We could have fabulous policy and nothing changes. So how is it then, if we create, for example, a bunch of white space in the curriculum, what then fills that space? Is it more of what we have now? Or is it something different that we're talking about? The ability to really get at those competencies, the ability to really have some time and place for project-based learning kinds of activities or whatever it might be. So it's that knowing-doing gap. We know what it is we need to do. We're trying to work with the field in some very different ways to address some of those barriers, but we know that in the final analysis, it's not us, it's teachers in schools. That's where the action's at. And we're so blessed in this province to have fabulous teachers. Testament to a lot of your work here. Fabulous teachers out there that we need to find different ways to support and new ways to support with some of the policy levers so that they can get at what they need to do. That's 32 seconds over time. So that's pretty good for me. Usually it's about 2 hours.
Yeah. That's true, actually.
So Maureen's going to, I think, talk a little bit about curriculum and competence.
5 minutes, maybe? Is that it? Okay. First of all, I just want to say how thrilled Rod and I are to be here today, truthfully, because we know we can't do it without you either. And it really is a collective endeavor that we're embarking on to change the world. In particular, to change what's happening for kids in British Columbia. And the only reason Rod and I are at the ministry, with all due forgiveness, dear Ruben, is because this is the most optimistic and this is the most hopeful time since the year 2000. Rod and I are there because we believe we can transform collectively with educators, with families, with community, what's happening to improve life chances for every kid in our province. And that's what we're here for today. And I'm just going to do a couple of things on the changes in curriculum, because the most important thing, I believe, is that this transformation that we continue to talk about puts learners at the center, not curriculum. It's the learner that's driving what's happening, not the prescription from ministry policy or procedures. So what you will see is a minimizing of what's prescribed by the Ministry of Education in order to maximize what we know makes a difference, in order to maximize opportunities for teachers to innovate, to be creative, to inquire, to inspire, right? To minimize what's prescribed, get out of the way in order to maximize the space and the place that teachers need to do what's right for kids. So for us, this is incredibly exciting to be part of this. And it's not the Ministry of Education that will make the change. It's what happens in classrooms. It's what happens with teachers, with administrators, with schools, with districts. And the ministry is enabling this by minimizing. For example, I just love to tell the story about the 93 learning outcomes in grade 2 English language arts. None of us ever did them all. We couldn't, right? So this transformation that we're talking about, again, heightens what we know is important in terms of competencies. So you'll find what's required are currently 3 competencies is what you'll see coming out in the work this fall. And in the highest performing jurisdictions around the world, the conversation is on what's going to make a difference for our kids for the future. So we're talking about thinking, creative, reflective, critical. We're talking about communication. Obviously, that's inherent to everything we do. And then we're most excited because we're talking about the 3rd competency that will be required, and that's around personal and social competence for all our kids, which is inclusive of self-regulation, inclusive of social-emotional learning, inclusive of collaboration, and most proud, inclusive of personal and cultural identity. So that's what you can look for, and Wendy's very good. I'm watching my clock, but what I want to say is we are so excited because this is strength-based. This is about who these children are, acknowledging every one of them has a gift, and building on those strengths, and personalizing what happens based on their passions, their interests, their needs, and clearing space for teachers to be able to do the work we know matters, improving life chances for all kids.
Yes!
Wow, that's how you get a group of educators going. Heather Brown. Brown is an educator from the Rocky Mountain School District, and Heather is living with new changes. You've been implementing some of the BC Ed plan and exploring growing your practice, and you're going to share that with us now. Thank you. Welcome to Heather.
Just want to say good morning. Today is my official last day of holiday. We start tomorrow. But it's really important for me to be here because I want to talk about the profession, because you are helping grow professionals. And so that the definition of, or what that means for teachers has shifted. I mean, the white space that Rod and Maureen were talking about, that is a new thing for us. And it's a new, even from my experience as a student. So the real question is, what does it mean to be a professional? And not that I can answer that, and not that any of us should be able to answer that, but it's the inquiry into that question that is what's most important. So the first thing I want to talk to you about, and it was a little tongue-in-cheek, but that image, is the idea of scale versus affiliation. So it used to be that we would get this really nice sealed package of curriculum, this really nice sealed package of information that we would just get and then read and do. And there were some people among us who, twisted it a little bit. There's lots of people who are innovating across the province. And then we would try to take that, distill it, simplify it, and then replicate. And the new model that we want to think through is actually affiliation. So rather than trying to copy something in a different context, it's about how do you teach people to interpret those principles and then apply them to their own practice. And that's a huge step to ask of new teachers, but that is the step that they have to have, I believe, to start. So the question I have for you as you listen to us today is, how do these principles affect how you will be educating new teachers? And that's the lens that you have to view what I have to say, because I'm just one teacher. We started on a project over a year ago. We got a bit of a call from the ministry, 6 districts, and we didn't really know what we were getting ourselves into, and neither did they. And that's sort of the model that has persisted for us for the last year. We were 6 districts, 4 people per district. We met, we thought it was 2 days. They're going to ask us what we think, and we'll go home and do what we've been doing. But they asked us what we thought, we kept talking, and then it evolved. And I think the fact that I'm here today, as requested by the Ministry of Education, and at our table we also have a student who's just about to start her first few days at UBC, that alone speaks to the fact that we are now trying to affiliate. We are not just saying top down. It's that removal of hierarchy. That's the powerful message in what we've been doing, and that's why I'm still with it. Because I really believe that that's the system that we have to grow. So that sort of speaks to the mindset of the linear model versus the complex model. And I really wish I'd chosen a different image of a fractal, but just because I wanted you to think about the self-identity inherent in fractals. Because the system, the ministry level, has a certain mindset that they're now embodying with students, with teachers, with principals, with superintendents, and amongst themselves. And that is replicated, or sorry, that's the wrong word. That is still being achieved at the school, the district level, at the school level, and has to be at the classroom level as well. So I can't have a hierarchy like we used to in the classroom. It just doesn't exist that way anymore. Knowledge isn't power. So the linear model, we used to think, I do this, and then I do that, and then I do this, and on June 30th, they're going to know it all, and they're going to have an exam, and we're done. But that's not the way it is. So one of the things that Wendy asked is try to give you lots of specific examples. In fact, there was a request to have video of my classroom. And that kind of undermines our first point, which is, I can't. Because if I give you a very specific example from my context, and I teach senior science, then people will have the tendency to want to replicate that idea. But it's talking about the principles to then apply to your own practice. And so that is a huge challenge for new teachers, because they don't have all of that background experience to be able to do that interpretation. And that's the piece that I think is your biggest challenge. So the last really important thing I want to speak about, and I've alluded to, is context. So this is an image that we've co-constructed, our little team in the last year, to represent how we're thinking about education in general. And so these are the inputs. And wherever you are, whether you're abroad at the ministry or at a university or in a classroom, those inputs will vary. Okay, so for me, they might be an article given to me by a principal. They might be a conference I've attended. They might be something my student has said to me. But I have to filter through those. Some of them will pass through and refract, and some of them will reflect, and I just heard it, not for me. But ultimately, they help me construct this emerging and enduring. And those two words, when Ruben brought that to us, that really resonated with me, because I have to identify what things in my practice am I playing with. And for me, that's almost always. Right? What I did last year was never good enough. I'm always going to be trying to reinvent and retool and reprocess. And the enduring are the things that I will fight you for. You tell me I can't do that in my classroom, I will fight for it. But that doesn't mean they last forever. I mean, obviously, I haven't been teaching for eons. I do remember what it was like to be a new teacher. But I also know that I wasn't schooled in the way that I am now helping students. I've had to make that transition from what I knew in terms of my experience to what I know is right now. So, to give you some specifics for what's emerging, well, the self-regulation. I mean, I teach grade 11 and grade 12. How do I inspire that in a course that is quite demanding? How do I make space for that? But what is enduring in my practice are things like AD partner talk and movement and making sure I have a really complex task. So I have had the luxury of figuring out what those things are for me, because I have a lot of conversations with colleagues at all levels through those affiliation networks that have helped me build what I view. So a really important question for you is, how are you going to help new teachers construct that idea of what's emerging? Because for them, they'll think everything is emerging. And how do you help them hit the ground, hit the classroom, with some enduring pieces? Because they have to. When they hit their classroom, they have to have some enduring pieces. They may not look the same every day for them, because they're going to be still tooling them a little bit. My enduring pieces I'm still retooling, but I know they're right because I see it in my students. But how do you help people without any experience other than their own education construct that enduring piece? That's a tall order, but still, I really firmly believe in that dynamic equilibrium that has to exist between those two. So when I play with self-regulation and how that looks in my classroom, I already have the sense that's going to become an enduring piece for me. So I have to allow that to become enduring, to shift into the enduring category, and something may actually sneak out the back. I can't have everything. And then something else will come in and I'll evaluate it and emerge as an emerging practice, and it may not become enduring. But it's that constant reflection. I ask students for feedback constantly. And I also ask my colleagues for feedback. I read a ton, because I am always looking for that thoughtful intersection between my belief of education, my experience in education, and what research says. Always looking for that intersection. And it is that complex view of education that allows me to navigate the ambiguity of the white space in our curriculum. So, thank you.
Woohoo!